Marriage would completely ruin my creative freedom, she said, laughing as I knelt there with the ring. I'd spent 3 years believing Lucy and I were building something real together, something worth the months of planning I'd put into this moment. As an automotive restoration specialist in Albuquerque, I appreciated the value of careful preparation and attention to detail, qualities that had led me to choose the perfect venue for what I thought would be the most important night of our lives. The private planetarium show at the local observatory felt like the ideal setting for someone who shared my fascination with precision and Lucy's love of beautiful, uncommon experiences. I had arranged for the meteor shower simulation to begin just as I dropped to one knee, the emerald ring I'd purchased from that antique market in Old Town catching the artificial starlight exactly as I'd envisioned. Lucy was a ceramics artist, 26 years old with hands that could shape clay into impossibly delicate forms, and I'd fallen in love with both her creativity and what I believed was her desire to build a future together. We'd talked about marriage countless times over our 3 years together, discussing everything from wedding venues to the kind of home we'd want to share, conversations that had convinced me she was ready for this commitment. The vintage emerald ring had cost me 2 months' salary, but I'd chosen it specifically because Lucy had admired it during one of our weekend walks through Old Town, commenting on its unique setting and the way the stones seemed to capture light from impossible angles. When the moment finally arrived and the artificial meteors began streaking across the domed ceiling above us, I felt confident and excited rather than nervous, certain that Lucy would appreciate both the thoughtfulness of the setting and the significance of what I was offering. Her initial silence as I opened the ring box seemed like rather than hesitation, and for a brief moment I thought I was witnessing the joy I'd hoped to create. Then she started laughing, not the delighted laughter of someone overwhelmed by happiness, but something that sounded almost dismissive, and I realized with growing confusion that this wasn't going according to any scenario I'd imagined. She explained, still chuckling as though my proposal was an amusing misunderstanding, that she was far too young to be thinking about marriage and had dreams of applying for art residencies across Europe, experiences that would be impossible if she tied herself down to domestic responsibilities. The elderly planetarium operator, who had helped me coordinate the timing of the meteor simulation, stood frozen in the corner of the room, clearly uncomfortable as he witnessed what was supposed to be a magical moment dissolving into my complete humiliation. Lucy continued talking about her need for creative freedom and how marriage would limit her artistic growth, never acknowledging the months of planning I'd invested or the fact that we'd discussed our future together as though it was something we both wanted. I sat there on one knee for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, processing the reality that the woman I'd planned to spend my life with saw our potential marriage as an obstacle rather than an adventure we'd share together. I silently pocketed the ring and walked out of the planetarium without saying another word, leaving Lucy still explaining her artistic vision to the uncomfortable elderly operator. The drive to my cousin's ranch outside Santa Fe took 2 hours, and I spent every mile processing what had just happened, replaying 3 years of conversations where Lucy had seemed excited about our future together. My cousin Marcus took one look at my face when I arrived and opened a beer without asking questions, letting me sit on his porch in silence until I was ready to talk about the complete dismantling of everything I'd believed about my relationship. The next morning I returned the ring to the antique dealer in Old Town, explaining simply that my plans had changed, and the elderly woman who had helped me select it months earlier offered her condolences without requiring details. I spent the rest of that day methodically packing my belongings from the apartment Lucy and I had shared for 18 months, timing my visit while she attended her Tuesday pottery class at the community center. I took only my essential items, my restoration tools, my clothes, and the motorcycle I'd been rebuilding in our shared garage, leaving behind the furniture we'd chosen together and the kitchen supplies I'd contributed to our domestic life. The note I left was brief and direct, explaining that I'd be arranging to pick up my remaining tools later and that she could keep everything else we'd accumulated during our time together. When I checked my phone that evening, I discovered 47 text messages and 15 voicemails, beginning with confusion about my absence and escalating to panic as Lucy apparently returned home to find my belongings gone. Her initial messages asked where I was and whether something had happened to me, but by message 20 she was demanding explanations and insisting that I was overreacting to what she described as a simple conversation about timing. The voicemails were particularly revealing, progressing from concerned girlfriend to someone who seemed genuinely shocked that her rejection of my proposal had consequences, as though she expected me to continue our relationship unchanged while she pursued her European art dreams. She contacted my sister, my parents, and even called my supervisor at the restoration shop, telling everyone that I was experiencing some kind of breakdown over a minor disagreement about wedding timelines. Lucy seemed incapable of understanding that her laughter during my proposal and her dismissal of marriage as creative limitation had fundamentally changed how I viewed our entire relationship, not just our immediate plans. Her messages became increasingly desperate as the days passed, with Lucy alternating between anger that I was ignoring her calls and confusion about why I would end 3 years together over what she continued to characterize as a misunderstanding rather than a clear statement of her priorities. 4 weeks after the planetarium disaster, I accepted a position with Low Country Vintage Motors in Charleston, a restoration company specializing in classic motorcycles and automotive rarities from the 1960s and 70s. The job offer had come through a connection from my current supervisor, who understood my need for a complete change of scenery and recommended me to his former colleague who was expanding operations on the East Coast. I drove cross-country with my rebuilt Triumph Bonneville loaded in a trailer behind my truck, taking 5 days to cross the desert and mountains while Lucy continued flooding my voicemail with increasingly frantic messages about how I was ruining both our lives over a simple miscommunication. The move to Charleston felt like stepping into a completely different world, with humid coastal air replacing the dry mountain climate of New Mexico and a pace of life that seemed more deliberate and thoughtful than the artistic urgency that had defined my previous environment. I changed my phone number on my second day in the city and blocked Lucy on every social media platform we'd shared, requesting through mutual friends that they respect my decision and avoid sharing information about my new location or circumstances. Most of our friends, surprisingly, understood my position without requiring detailed explanations, perhaps having witnessed Lucy's casual dismissal of commitment in other areas of her life and recognizing that her rejection of marriage wasn't an isolated incident but part of a broader pattern. Lucy's response to my complete disappearance became increasingly desperate and invasive, according to my sister, who continued receiving calls despite my requests for no contact. She showed up at my former workplace demanding my new address and contact information, telling my replacement that she needed to reach me about urgent personal matters that required immediate resolution. When my supervisor refused to provide any details about my whereabouts, Lucy apparently spent an hour in the parking lot calling everyone we knew, trying to piece together clues about where I might have relocated. She somehow tracked down my sister's work number and called repeatedly, insisting that I was having a mental health crisis and needed intervention from family members who cared about my well-being. My sister, who had never particularly liked Lucy's self-centered approach to relationships, told her bluntly that I seemed happier and more focused than I had in months, and that perhaps Lucy should consider why someone would relocate across the country rather than continue a relationship with her. The most disturbing development was Lucy's creation of multiple fake social media accounts designed to monitor my activities and attempt contact despite my blocks, a level of surveillance that convinced me I'd made the right decision by putting physical distance between us. Charleston's vintage motorcycle community welcomed me immediately, and I discovered a thriving restoration collective that specialized in classic Triumph and Norton bikes from the 1960s. Machines that required the same attention to detail and mechanical precision I'd always valued in my work. The Low Country Vintage Motors shop operated out of a converted warehouse near the historic district, where I worked alongside craftsmen who shared my appreciation for authentic restoration techniques and original manufacturing methods. Within 6 months, I developed an unexpected passion for blacksmithing after learning that many motorcycle components required custom metalwork that couldn't be sourced from modern suppliers. The meditative rhythm of forge work provided exactly the kind of therapeutic focus I needed, transforming raw iron into functional art while processing the emotional aftermath of my failed relationship. I began creating custom metal sculptures in my spare time, pieces that incorporated motorcycle parts with traditional blacksmithing techniques, and my work started attracting attention from local galleries and collectors who appreciated both the craftsmanship and the industrial aesthetic. Meanwhile, Lucy documented what she called her authentic artist lifestyle on Instagram with increasingly frequent posts from expensive trips to Tuscany and Morocco, always featuring different male companions at gallery openings and wine tastings in locations that clearly cost more than her pottery sales could support. Her social media presence became a performance of independence and creative freedom, with captions about living without compromises and following artistic passion wherever it led, but mutual friends reported that she constantly asked about my whereabouts and whether I was dating anyone new. The irony wasn't lost on me that someone who had rejected marriage as a limitation on her creativity was now using social media to broadcast a lifestyle that seemed entirely dependent on wealthy men funding her artistic adventures across Europe and North Africa. Her posts became more frequent and desperate over time, featuring elaborate meals at Michelin-starred restaurants and private tours of famous museums, experiences that seemed designed to demonstrate the exciting life I was supposedly missing by choosing stability over spontaneity. I learned through my sister that Lucy had started telling people I was having a quarter-life crisis and would eventually return to New Mexico once I realized my mistake, a narrative that revealed her complete inability to accept that someone might genuinely prefer building something meaningful over chasing temporary excitement. 2.5 years later, I met Stella at a maritime museum fundraiser where several of my custom metal sculptures were being exhibited alongside historical artifacts from Charleston's naval history. She was a marine archaeologist specializing in Civil War shipwrecks, someone whose professional dedication and clear long-term goals stood in stark contrast to Lucy's scattered artistic pursuits and inability to commit to any specific direction. Stella spoke directly about wanting marriage and children within the next few years, discussing these topics with the same straightforward practicality she brought to her archaeological research, never treating serious life decisions as obstacles to personal growth or creative expression. Our relationship developed naturally through shared interests in historical preservation and hands-on restoration work, with weekends spent exploring underwater archaeological sites where I photographed Stella's discoveries while she documented artifacts that had remained hidden beneath Charleston Harbor for over a century. I found myself genuinely fascinated by her work, learning about pottery shards and ship construction techniques from someone who could explain historical context with the same precision I applied to motorcycle restoration, creating a partnership based on mutual respect for expertise rather than one person supporting another's lifestyle. When I briefly made my Instagram account public to showcase my expanding metalwork business, Lucy immediately began harassing us through her collection of fake accounts, leaving cryptic comments about people who choose safety over passion and making veiled references to rebound relationships that wouldn't last once the novelty wore off. Her interference revealed that she'd been monitoring my activities constantly throughout my time in Charleston, tracking my professional development and personal relationships with a level of obsession that confirmed my decision to relocate had been necessary for my psychological well-being. Stella handled Lucy's digital stalking with remarkable composure, simply blocking each fake account as it appeared and suggesting we document the harassment in case it escalated to more serious interference with our lives. The contrast between Lucy's desperate attempts to disrupt my happiness and Stella's calm confidence in our relationship highlighted exactly why I'd been able to build something real with someone who valued commitment over drama and genuine partnership over performative independence. Lucy's comments grew increasingly bitter and personal, attacking both my character and Stella's appearance while positioning herself as the authentic artistic soul I'd abandoned for conventional domesticity, a narrative that revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of what constitutes meaningful connection between two people. Stella and I married 18 months later in a simple ceremony at a restored plantation overlooking Charleston Harbor, exchanging custom-forged wedding rings that incorporated metal from a Civil War anchor she'd discovered during her research on Confederate blockade runners. The wedding was everything Lucy's dream ceremony would never have been: intimate rather than performative, focused on commitment rather than spectacle, attended by people who genuinely supported our partnership rather than those impressed by expensive displays. We honeymooned exploring Caribbean shipwrecks, combining Stella's archaeological research with my underwater photography as I documented her discoveries of pottery fragments and ship hardware that had remained undisturbed for centuries beneath tropical waters. The experience of working together professionally while celebrating our marriage felt like the perfect foundation for our future, creating memories based on shared purpose rather than expensive locations or luxury experiences that served no meaningful function. Meanwhile, Lucy's social media revealed that she'd impulsively married a cryptocurrency day trader named Marcus after just 3 months of dating, posting elaborate content about finally finding someone who matched her spontaneous energy and understood the importance of seizing opportunities without overthinking consequences. Her wedding photos showcased a Las Vegas ceremony that seemed designed to demonstrate her continued commitment to excitement over stability, featuring designer gowns and luxury hotel suites that clearly cost more than most people's annual salaries. I felt genuinely happy for her, hoping she'd found someone who appreciated her need for constant stimulation and financial support for her artistic adventures, though I suspected the relationship would face challenges when reality intruded on their shared fantasy of limitless possibility. The marriage imploded within 16 months according to mutual friends who still followed both our lives, apparently due to financial disagreements and Lucy's inability to commit to any long-term plans, including discussions about starting a family or purchasing property together. Marcus had expected Lucy to eventually settle into domestic stability after their wedding, while Lucy had assumed marriage would simply provide a more secure financial foundation for her continued artistic exploration and international travel, creating fundamental incompatibility that neither had anticipated during their whirlwind courtship. Her divorce proceedings became public drama on social media, with cryptic posts about toxic masculinity and men who promise adventure but demand conformity, never acknowledging her own role in creating unrealistic expectations about marriage providing unlimited freedom without corresponding responsibility. On our 5th anniversary, while camping with our twin sons at a coastal archaeological site where Stella was conducting research on Revolutionary War-era merchant vessels, I received a lengthy Instagram message from Lucy that began with congratulations on our beautiful family and escalated into a confession of regrets about choices she'd made years earlier. She admitted that rejecting my proposal had been her greatest mistake, claiming that years of therapy had finally taught her that adventure and commitment weren't mutually exclusive and that she'd been too immature to recognize the difference between partnership and imprisonment when I'd offered her both stability and genuine love. Lucy described watching successful couples travel and build careers together, finally understanding what real partnership looked like after experiencing relationships where men either tried to control her completely or provided financial support without emotional investment. Her message revealed a level of self-awareness I'd never witnessed during our 3 years together, acknowledging that her fear of domestic limitation had prevented her from appreciating someone who would have supported her artistic development while building something meaningful together. She asked if we could reconnect as friends since she'd learned to value stability over excitement and claimed to have developed a healthier understanding of how commitment could enhance rather than restrict personal growth and creative expression. Reading her words while watching Stella teach our 4-year-old sons to identify pottery shards from colonial settlements, I felt a mixture of vindication and genuine sympathy for someone who had finally learned lessons that could have saved our relationship if she'd been capable of understanding them 7 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me that Lucy's rejection, which had felt like devastating personal failure at the time, had actually redirected my life towards someone who shared my values and wanted to build the same kind of future I'd always imagined. I deleted her message without reading it completely and blocked her account permanently, realizing that while I harbored no anger toward her anymore, I also had no interest in maintaining any connection with someone who represented a version of myself that had accepted less than I deserved. Lucy's confession felt less like genuine remorse and more like another attempt to insert herself into a life she'd voluntarily abandoned, seeking validation from someone who'd found happiness precisely because she'd removed herself from his world.